What is up, fight fans? Welcome to the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. First and foremost, want to give a shout out here to the Mile High Sports crew. There is no shortage of action going on in the core four of sports out there. We have the Broncos coming back from bye week. Both CU as well as CSU are going to bowls this year. CSU going to the Snoop Dogg Arizona Bowl. I mean, Danny, I guess I've been out of the loop with college football, but how long has Snoop Dogg been sponsoring a bowl game for? Is this the first one,
I
or am
believe
I out of
this
the
is the
loop?
first. Yep. I
Okay.
believe this is the first one.
Okay. Well, I guess as a CSU alum and a longtime Snoop fan, match made in heaven, I guess. Going to be a lot of vitamin taking CSU Rams making their way down to Arizona for that game. I can only imagine. You have winter sports in full swing right now. You have the Avalanche as well as the Nuggets. Like I say, there is lots of things going on over here at the Mile High Sports Network. If you have the opportunity, please check them out. Hit the like, share, and subscribe button wherever possible. That's the podcast network. Check out the website, magazine, merch drop, all of that. Tons of things to be had there. There is one event that is closing out the year here in Colorado, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that this weekend, but it's going down at the Norris Penrose Event Center down in Colorado Springs. This is Battle MMA Championships. There are a few pro fights on the card, a bunch of amateur fights on the card. It's going to be a great night of action for you to close out the year. There is also going to be an airtight boxing show happening this weekend here in Denver. So if you're around, I'll be calling the action over there. So come check us out. And then starting off the year in 2025, Sparta will be having a couple of events in January. There's going to be a strikers only night as well as then a caged violence night. If you have the opportunity to buy tickets from the fighters directly, please do. That goes towards their commission. That helps them make some money, especially amateurs. This is the only way that they can actually get paid. So please do what you can to help support them. That also helps build their platform and their profile to go on to bigger opportunities following the one that they're going to be going into for those tickets. So if you have the opportunity, again, please buy those tickets directly from the fighter, or if it's online, or if you're watching the streams, use their code. That all directly benefits them. Transitioning now to the weekend recap. This last weekend, we had the final pay-per-view event for the UFC that happened in Las Vegas. There was a couple of surprising fights. There were a couple of them that I think that we saw the end of the road, a couple where it just was a complete head scratcher, if you will. So from the top to the bottom, let's go ahead and take a look here. In the main event, it was a flyweight title fight. Alexandre Pantoja taking on newcomer Kai Asakura. Very rarely is it a situation where somebody is making their UFC debut and it's also a title fight. He was a champion from another major organization, and Pantoja's beaten everybody else in the top ranks. That is how Kai Asakura was granted this opportunity. But I have a hard time looking at the rankings and looking to see who does Kai Asakura beat in the top 10. I mean, maybe Albazi. Maybe he has a chance to catch Kai. Outside of that, what are we talking about? Are we dipping all the way down to 10 at Timmy? Because he's not beating Royval. He's not beating Moreno. It's just not happening. Almabayev, he's a rising prospect who we haven't really seen a lot of, but based off of the lack of grappling that we saw from Kai Asakura, I think that that's a wrap for him. I don't know. I think that he has a dynamic and exciting style, but if you look at the lay of the land in the top 5 or the top 10, if you will, almost everybody in the flyweight division outside of Kai are black belts. That is a bad time for Kai Asakura when a lot of these guys get their hands on him and get into tight quarters. Pantoja calls out Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson following the fight. Consensus GOAT at 125 pounds. Arguably on some people's list, the greatest of all time. Mighty Mouse is not coming out of retirement. Plain and simple. Mighty Mouse had a response to it on his online stream immediately after the fight. He said, I'm not coming out of retirement. He said, at my age, at 38, with where I'm sitting at, I have no reason to come back. I'm not doing it. And he even followed that to saying to Pantoja, you shouldn't want me. You should want to be more than what I was or do more than what I did. If you feel like you've cleared out this division, go and try to take another belt. Go try to move up if that's what you feel or that's where the place that you think that you're at. Because when we look at it overall and you ask the question or all the pundits and the analysts ask following that card, who is next for Pantoja? Well, obviously the homer in me, and I rightfully think that it should be back to the number one contender, which happens to be Brandon Royval. But when you're Alexandre Pantoja, when I'm looking at this from a completely balanced perspective, when you have 2 wins against Royval, 3 wins against Moreno, a win against Kai France, who are 1, 2, and 4 of the division. Number 3 is Amir Albazi. Albazi is coming off of a loss, so he can't be thrown in there next. Number 5, Tatsuro Taira. He lost to number 1, so he can't be thrown in the mix. It's a sticky place for the division right now because of all of those things. Naturally, I would love to see Brandon Royval get that title fight, and I think he separated himself, and I don't think there's really anyone else in that mix. However, I would not be surprised now that all of this to be said if they run that trilogy with Moreno. I'm not sure. I don't want that. I would rather him get the title fight. But again, Pantoja is just in such a weird place because who else is there for him? When we take a look at the co-main event, this was arguably the most eye-opening fight of the night for me. And I say that because Shavkat looked human. This was the first time that the Nomad did not look like a complete mauler. And yes, I understand that he has the torn MCL, and that obviously played a big factor in him being able to level change and use more of a freestyle game and using the legs with his wrestling as opposed to going body locks in a more of a Greco style. I understand all of that. However, he's not the first person to ever go into a fight injured. Ian Machado Gary looked way better against the boogeyman than I ever possibly thought. If we're being completely honest, I thought that Shavkat was going to buzzsaw his way all the way into like 5 title defenses deep running through the division by the way that he had looked prior to Saturday night. After Saturday, I feel like he showed signs of being human. There were ways that he could be beat. And I think that somebody like Bilal can wrestle and push the pace with him. 425. He looked tired after a few of those grappling exchanges. Now, I will concede that I don't know if that is maybe due to the lack of conditioning based on the knee injury. Could be that. Could be that Ian Gary was running at that high of a clip and a pace that, hey, sometimes it just happens. The adrenaline dump effect. There could have been so many things coming into play, but what we do know from Bilal, and even if he is so unpopular or unliked by the masses that not even security knew who he was when he was trying to walk into the cage and they were trying to kick him out from the cage side area. Bilal has legit skills. Bilal, with the game planning of Habib, I think that the gap is a lot closer in that fight than what we were originally anticipating. Though I do have to give kudos and credit to Shavkat. Shavkat could have just waited a few weeks for Bilal to heal up from the injury and could have ran that fight in a few weeks. He decided to put his title shot and his spot in the division on the line to fight Ian Gary, one of the top rising prospects, another undefeated kid who had so much hype behind him. And they go to a 48-47 gunslinger draw with Ian taking his back in the 5th round. That was a much closer fight than I thought. I am the first one to admit that that did not go the way that I anticipated it. You had a split decision that was the head turner on the entire card. You had Dana White himself speaking out against it. The whole crowd booed. Volkov was going crazy. Cyril Gahn picks up a split decision victory. Gahn kind of walked off as soon as they announced his name. Typically, that's kind of a sign that even he didn't believe that he won the fight. I understand that there were some close exchanges in the 2nd round, and the commission went over to the broadcast table to try to explain that it was based on some of the damage done in those sequences or the perceived damage done to the judges from that vantage point. But for the love of God, how many times are we going to have Adelaide Bird a part of a controversial split decision? It's absolutely absurd to me that it's some of these names that are consistencies over and over, but yet the commission does nothing. Your Adelaide Birds, your Chris Lees, it's absolutely insane that nothing gets done in these cases. You had a matchup between Thug Nasty Bryce Mitchell taking on Jiu-Jitsu Royalty and Kron Gracie. I think that this is the final stage that we see with Kron in the UFC. He is royalty within the jiu-jitsu world. His father, Hickson Gracie, is arguably the greatest ever, along with a very successful undefeated MMA career himself before he stopped fighting. But Kron is just not that. The attempts to try to jump guard, just being so one-dimensional at this high level, it just doesn't cut it. He's one of the absolute best and slickest submission artists in the entire world when it comes to pure jiu-jitsu. But when you mix that up in the cage, when you have to add the strikes into the process, there's the cage, there's the slams. He tried to jump guard with Bryce. He gets slammed. He was already rocked. The lights were already starting to fade by the time that they got down to the canvas once he got slammed. And then those 2 elbows were just putting icing on the cake, just sealing the deal for him. Bryce Mitchell was the guy who a year ago was in the opposite position, got knocked out cold by Josh Emmett, had a seizure in front of the entire world. This year, takes time off, spends a lot of time on recovering his brain. He becomes married. He has a child. He feels like he has been more dialed in and disciplined, dedicated to his diet and his training than he's ever been. And that was one of the best performances that we've seen from Bryce. Granted, again, it was against a Kron Gracie who is a very limited fighter, but a very big name. And he did everything that he said that he was going to do. He said, brother, the Mitchell name really isn't anything right now. Gracie, I don't care what his first name is. That's a Gracie. That's a legacy. That's a Gracie right there. So, yes, Bryce, Thug Nasty Mitchell goes out there, gets the big victory, and congratulations to him moving forward and getting his hand back raised, moving his record to 17-2. You had another matchup in the featherweight division opening up the card, and this one didn't have the back and forth exciting fireworks that I thought that it was going to. You had Duho Choi taking on Nate the Train Landwehr, and usually Nate's going to take a little bit of a beating in that first round, and then he finds a way to rally through and start to mount his offense and find his comebacks and his attack. And that just simply wasn't the case here. Duo Choi, we saw him in the UFC so early, and when you have someone who gets to the UFC when they're in their early 20s, they still have a lot of learning to do on the job in many cases. And while he did have that top 10 most underrated or one of the greatest fights that you could ever watch in terms of entertainment value with Cub Swanson, prior to him having to do his mandatory military service, he had some ups and downs, but ever since he's made his return, yes, he's not the most active, but you want to talk about exciting performance after exciting performance and getting better with every single outing. That's Duho Choi right now. And against a very tough Nate the Train Landwehr, he went out there and he beat the brakes off of Nate the Train, which is something that is very hard to do. And we don't see people put Nate the Train away. We saw the grappling be a major facet in this matchup too, which is something that is a new wrinkle in the game for Choi. He trains directly with Korean Zombie, so I think that him having just someone who has the experience that Chan Sung Jung does is just a massive asset for him as he continues to forge forward on his path in the featherweight division. The next fight, and it's one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about later, it was a KO TKO victory for Dominic Reyes. Dominic Reyes went out there and Dominic did his job. That's what, at the end of the day, he's a professional. And despite what his opponent may have been going through or the circumstances surrounding his opponent's personal life and things away from the cage, if you will, Dominic still had a job to go out there and do as long as there was somebody that was standing across the cage from him. And he did. He went out there and he picked up a TKO victory in the second round. And that is now back-to-back victories for Dominic Reyes after the 3 devastating knockouts, or excuse me, the 3 losses and the couple back-to-back devastating knockout losses that he took. So, like I say, that's something that Dominic Reyes is able to build off of as he tries to get himself back toward title contention. Both of those guys once fought for a title and lost to John Jones. Obviously, the title has shifted hands a couple of times, now sitting with Alex Pereira. What is next for Dominic Reyes? We'll see here in the next few weeks what he gets matched up with next. The next fight, I had a couple of people send this one to me and ask me, did Vicente Luque look that good, or did Temba just kind of fall into Vicente's bread and butter? I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think that Luque definitely outmatches Temba. Luque is, in my opinion, the best guy that Temba's ever fought. Temba was the short notice fill-in. This was originally slated to be Nick Diaz. But if you look over the course of Luque's career, what is what he does best? Club and sub. He's going to club and sub. He rocks you on the feet, and then his arm in choke series, whether it's the Darce or the Anaconda, that is what he's going to go to over and over. And that's exactly what happened here in this matchup. You had a tremendous fight in the featherweight division between Mosfar Avoyev taking on Aljamain Sterling. Sterling made a statement on his YouTube channel that he doesn't exactly know what's next. He doesn't really want to retire, but he also, at this stage, he doesn't know, how much he wants to put into making the climb back up the ladder. And he said that a large part of it is just due to he can't train the way that he used to, which made him feel like he had a certain edge. And it also probably in turn broke down his body a little bit extra in the process or a little bit quicker, which is totally understandable. He's now sitting in his mid-30s. He's a former champion at 135 pounds, has had a couple of very major surgeries throughout the course of his career. I can understand how the accumulation total of the injuries and how it's just tough to get through those training camps to do it at that high of a level, and taking a tight loss against Avoyev to then have to make that march with another couple of wins to get back just to where he is now. I understand where his thought process is. You got a controversial fight with Brian Battle beating Randy Brown by split decision. Obviously, the major controversy coming into this fight is that Brian Battle missed weight by 4 pounds That's definitely a significant advantage that goes toward him. And does that play a difference in how that fight ends up? Hard to say, but it's also hard to ignore. Just another couple to speak to before we move on here. Friend of the program, Eric Andres, ya boy, took on Chris Weidman and won by a KO TKO in the second round. Eric only has a couple of fights left on his UFC contract, and then he's calling it a career. Look forward to seeing what he's able to do on the way out. Eric he's a great dude. He trained out here in Denver years ago and became friends and have stayed in contact throughout the years. And he's a dude's dude. That's the best way that you could put it. He's a national champion at, the story. He's national champion under Nick Saban at Alabama, winning, uh, having the strip sack fumble in that game, a highlight player, so on and so forth, goes on, has this run in the UFC, and he's coming to an end of this chapter, and he's looking to go out on a high note. He's got a couple of fights left, so I'm looking forward to see how that plays out. Chatting a couple of fights on the 5280 Muay Thai fight series from the weekend. We had Alejandro Rodriguez of Easton Muay Thai winning in the main event, a title eliminator fight against TJ Click. And Rodriguez will now go on to challenge the champion Cordo Hansen in Q1 of 2025 for that ISKA belt. Hiro Martinez of High Altitude Martial Arts won in the co-main event. Back and forth affair with Sam Kinsey. You had Tyree Woolfork of AMAG winning by TKO. Javon Dale won by an impressive leg kick TKO. Another couple of matchups to mention real quick before we head off to the next segment. You had Zakai Strong of Heavy Hands, Heavy Hearts Training Center winning a gritty battle that went on to a sudden victory fourth round. Omar Habibi won in his Muay Thai debut. Taylor Burrow earned a hard-fought victory over Kelly Baker. That was a slugfest back and forth for 3 rounds. Gabe Echeverry got the nod in a back-and-forth affair with Douglas Martinez. And then Lorenzo Grigio scored 2 standing 8 counts en route to a unanimous decision victory. And we will be back with another Muay Thai show in March. That's going to be March 1st. Whether that is a C3 or a 5280 banner, haven't decided as far as what the official logistics on that is, but be on the lookout for March 1st. There is also going to be Muay Thai events going on that entire weekend, so we'll have more on that as the time draws near. Now, shifting to the final UFC event of the year, we have UFC Tampa. This weekend, this card is being headlined by a female matchup by a couple of top-ranked top 10 contenders. You have Amanda Hebus taking on Mackenzie Dern. Obviously, these are 2 very decorated and highly thought of fighters in this division. They're some of the most accomplished in their individual disciplines, whether it be judo on one side, jiu-jitsu on the other. And when we look at the grappling, I think that the submission skills obviously favor Mackenzie. Striking wise, though, I think that over the course of the last couple of outings, we have seen Mackenzie regress. It's never that she was going to be the world beater or she was never a top-notch elite striker, but she had been rounding out some of those basic tendencies or mistakes, if you will. But again, over the last couple of fights, she's just been a lot more reckless and kind of reverting to some of those bad habits that got her caught or where she took damage a lot earlier in her career. I think that Amanda Hebus could potentially exploit those. What do you guys think? How do you see how this main event folds for this final event of the year down in Tampa? Let me know on social media. That's Jordan Kurtz at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. But I think the real big fight, and I don't mean to slight the ladies, but the people's main event on this card is the co-main event. That's a welterweight ranked matchup between Colby Chaos Covington taking on Joaquin Buckley. Media day will happen tomorrow, so we don't have any fireworks or any hot sound bites to be able to give you as far as the latest and greatest from these two, but they're both guys who are never afraid to share their thoughts. They've never met a camera or a microphone that they don't like. I can almost be certain that there will be some headlines that will just be complete head turners from these two following media day tomorrow and throughout the week as fight week draws near. It's a little bit interesting though, as far as the activity levels go. I believe it's like 9 years that Colby's been in the UFC. He has just 2 fights more than Buckley does in 4 years. Buckley obviously coming in, starting at the middleweight division, then makes his way down to welterweight. Ever since he's made that descent down to 170 pounds, he's been on a complete tear. And now seeing himself inside of the top 10, he could go on to fight a multiple time title challenger in Colby Chaos Covington at the number 6 position. And, Buckley could very well win this fight. If Colby has not, I guess, and I know that there was the injury, the broken foot, all of that happened in the first round with the Leon fight last December. But if Colby has continued to kind of slide with where he's at in age, this could be a highlight reel performance type of night for Joaquin Buckley. I know that a lot of people aren't going to like to see that. They're not going to like to see it on the other way. These are arguably two of the most polarizing and in their respective ways unliked guys on the entire roster, and they're fighting each other. That's why you want to watch this fight, because it's just, okay, well, is there a way that you have a double knockout? And it's a rare thing. It's happened in the past. We haven't seen it in a long, long time, but is it a possibility? Who knows? In the feature fight, you have Cub Swanson taking on Billy Q. Featherweight matchup. Killer Cub is another guy who he is on the back nine. He's on the way out. Billy Q is getting toward his mid-30s, but Billy's still got a lot of miles left on the tank. I know that Billy was a guy who some of the analysts were starting to try to say, oh, is he starting to slip or starting to regress? But I still think that Billy has a lot left in the tank, and Cub on any given night could still go out there and rip and roar. That's where, does the pace and the pressure of Billy give Cub bits, or is Cub able to figure out a way to use his angles, rip the kicks, find those violent boxing entries that he's so accustomed to throughout his career? And Cub also being a black belt. Both of these guys, great grapplers, but I do believe that Cub holds an advantage in the submission skills department between the two of them. You have a matchup in the flyweight division between two ranked guys, Manel Kopp taking on Bruno Silva. Silva is a rising prospect in this division. I think that Manel Kopp's biggest opponent this weekend for himself is going to be the scale. He's a guy who came into the UFC with tremendous amount of hype. He was a former flyweight division champion of Ryzen, comes over to the UFC. He has a victory over Kai Asakura. I just think that he's kind of underwhelmed since he's been to the UFC. And again, a couple of the scale mishaps, a couple of lackluster performances after a lot of wolf tickets being sold, like the Mokaya fight. That's where he's just kind of fallen out of favor with the fan base, and I feel like as well as the matchmakers. You have Adrian Yanez getting back into the mix with Daniel Marcos. Daniel Marcos coming into the contest at 16-0, but Yanez is one of the smoothest boxers in the entire division, and I think that he's now kind of starting to get stride. We saw him have a couple of hiccups, and especially him losing his coach, Coach Solis. That was a massive impact for a lot of the fighters in that camp who were not expecting to have to deal with that sort of adversity. And he kind of took over in a head coaching role. Sometimes when you're running the camp of everything by yourself, it doesn't necessarily work out. He's got things a little bit more dialed in, has a team and a camp and a system around him, has a lot of those guys from that Iridium camp that are always in the mix with him out there in Las Vegas. So I think that Yanez is starting to put things back together. And, he's a guy who at one point was thought to be the next great prospect at 135 pounds. I do believe that he has the potential to continue to recapture that, but he does have a stiff test against Daniel Marcos. I think that if we're getting into a slugfest and this goes straight to tight quarters and this happens in a phone booth with the boxing, I like Adrian Yanez in that matchup. Another couple of fights to talk about here before we round off to a couple of things. We're going to take a look at a couple on the prelims. You have our friend of the program, matter of fact, the very first guest that we ever had on the program in the Hanyak Dustin Jacoby. He is taking on Vitor Petrino. Vitor Petrino is a menacing prospect coming out of Brazil at 11-1, but you have the Hanyak, who is almost, he's two sleep shy of 2 decades into the fight game now at this stage. Fought for a Glory World title, was in the UFC by the time when he was 23, had a couple of side quests along the way, gets back in and has had a top ranked run. The last couple weren't exactly his ideal outcomes, but he's looking to get back in there, pick up a big victory. And if you know anything about Dustin Jacoby, ladies and gentlemen, you know that Dustin is the ultimate gamer. He is a competitor of all competitors, and on any given night, you give Dustin the chance to get in there and mix it up. He's going to give you absolutely everything that he has until his last breath. And I look for Dustin Jacoby to go out there and to try to say, hey, I'm still here on Saturday night. You have a matchup between Michael Johnson and Atman Azatar in the lightweight division. Michael Johnson might be the ultimate enigma of this entire era of MMA. You have a guy who has knockouts against Dustin Poirier, has beaten Tony Ferguson, has big victories over top name guys, but then will go out there and have egg dropping performances. Just such a 50-50 sort of guy in that way, but on any given night has the chance to go out there and put somebody out. But on the flip side, especially now that he's a little bit later on in his career and with some of the wars that he's gone through, there's a good chance that Ottman might be able to find that big punch and be able to put Michael Johnson out stiff. And it's another guy who's kind of at the question of how much is left in the tank for Michael Johnson if he is to be finished again this weekend. You have Joel Alvarez taking on Jakar Close. What a fight. I think that Alvarez is one of the most undervalued or most underappreciated prospects in the division at 155 pounds. I think that he's a guy who has Jalen Turner-like dimensions. When you're talking a guy who is 6'2", 6'3" at 155 pounds, that is a problem to have to deal with, especially with all the tools that he possesses, and he's able to keep you off of him, work his angles, and find his strikes. Yeah, that's a problem. And you have a grinder in Jakar Close. How will he be able to solve that puzzle? Can he get inside? We'll have to see. I think that a boxing matchup where you're going to see a striker's delight is another matchup in the featherweight division this weekend. That's Sean Woodson. He's taken on Fernando Padilla, two of the longest guys at featherweight. Sean Woodson is an alien for the division. I mean, the dude has a 2-inch torso and everything else is all limbs. I mean, if you look at a tripod, like that's kind of like how his entire body is set up. Like, it's just a very weird arrangement, but it works for him. Former pro boxer, and then now the way that he's been able to transition into the game. Fernando Padilla, a very boxing heavy Mexican style fighter. But when it comes to having to switch it up, it's tough to do it against Sean Woodson because of his hip height and his level. He is very difficult to be able to get in on a takedown entry, especially if you get him backed up against the fence. You have a difficult time of trying to get the leverage that you need to be able to bring him down to the canvas. What do you guys think, though, as far as the card? Are there any other matchups that you guys want to hear more of throughout the week? Let me know on social media. That's me, Jordan Kurtz, at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. Going to move on to another topic that we hinted at earlier on in the program, and it's one that it does hit a little close to home, and I'll try to keep myself together as much as I can through the process of going through it. But look, I know what some of the criticisms and the whispers are about Anthony Lionheart Smith's outing over the weekend at UFC 310. I get it. The truth is, Dominic Reyes wasn't his opponent that night. Grief was. Heartbreak was. To catch you up to speed, if you're looking for some context, Anthony's best friend and jiu-jitsu professor, Scott Morton, tragically passed away about a week and a half ago, so just a few days out from fight night. Scotty was basically Anthony's right-hand man who was in his corner for almost all of his 60+ fights. All week, Anthony spoke about how he didn't care about the outcome. He just wanted to go out there and break something. Anthony was overtaken by emotion as soon as he hit the curtain, and he remained emotional all the way through the check-in station. In true Lionheart fashion, when he offered his unguarded face to Dominic Reyes and told him to punch him just so he could feel something, that was the most raw and real moment in fighting on the highest level that I could relate to, and it resonated with me so deeply on a personal level. Again, grief was the opponent, not Reyes. Sometimes that physical pain feels better than the pain that you're fighting in between the ears. Anthony has gone through a lot of unfortunate adversity outside of the cage in the last couple of years, including losing his mom and then now his best friend. Welcoming that physical pain at least lets you feel alive. When you have that type of pain where you're just at the level of, F it, and you just want to break something, sometimes that something is yourself. And I wish that I didn't understand his pain, but unfortunately, I do. And so for the Morton family, the Skywalker community out there in Omaha, Nebraska, and all of those affected by the passing of Scott Morton, I send my deepest thoughts, prayers, and condolences to all of you. And Anthony, we've been friends and peers for a long time now. I can't imagine what that feels like having to go out there and make the walk without him when he's been there at every step along the way. So my heart goes out to you, big dog. This weekend we have Battle MMA Championships that is going down at the Norris Penrose Event Center down in Colorado Springs. There is a title fight that's happening between Jones and TJ Salas. We have friend of the program, Miguel Barrientos, is going to be making his pro debut on that card. There is Lee versus Bennett, Olszewski versus Balon, Mohammed versus Martinez, Crane versus Sam Gaffney, Zarate versus Whit Campbell, Ruan versus Garcia, Perez versus Wellington Duplessis, Coke versus Gio Pardini, Young versus Villarreal, Venegas versus Becker, Lee versus Cody Scher, Vargas versus Serrano, Mueller versus Dylan King. Dylan Killer King, that's always an exciting fight. Killer be killed no matter what his matchup is. That's a guy who goes out there and wants to put on a show for the fans. So if you have the opportunity to go out there and check out some MMA action this weekend in Southern Colorado, check them out there at the Norris Penrose Event Center. You could also follow Battle MMA and see any of their streaming information online. Want to talk real quick now about a project here in the community that is something that is a great benefit. And that is Guardian. It's Jiu-Jitsu for All. The mission of Guardian, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which is committed to providing free youth jiu-jitsu scholarships to underserved youth around the world. Guardian is dedicated to offering children year-round stability and consistency through our programs, focusing not just on their physical transformation, but also on fostering positive friendships, mentorship opportunities, and a secure environment during challenging times. By partnering with established and trustworthy academies, donors can trust that a minimum of 85% of their contributions directly fund the scholarships that they support. There are more than 390 underserved youth students that are currently sponsored with our 17 projects worldwide. Visit FactoryXMuayThai.com today to make your tax-deductible donation and help support a student in our community. Going to move along now and close out the program with 3 rounds. I got my man Danny Bailey behind the boards for me. First round, my brother. What do we have?
It appears that the same fan that caused the skirmish with Arman Sarukian initiated the altercation with Merab Dvalishvili. Is this an organized effort?
I think that we have learned now with the evidence that has surfaced, Danny, that it is absolutely an organized effort. In general, I hate that now, especially that we've learned this, that Armand got suspended. I hate that Armand got suspended in the first place or had to deal with any sort of sanction. Because if you're out there and you're putting hands on fighters as they're walking out or their cornermen as they're walking out and provoking them, you deserve to get your mouth slapped. And Dana White himself came out and said, what do I do with Marab? Marab is my mini Strickland. You can't keep him around humans, can't keep him around people. Well, what have we also learned from this case is the man who was involved in instigating each of these two altercations has tight ties or connections or is a part of the Nurmagomedov camp. There are multiple posts, photos, videos, things of that nature online that have him connected and, being there with Umar and those guys. So, yeah, I think that this is certainly an orchestrated attempt at trying to get a rise out of some of these guys.
UFC featherweight champion Ilya Topuria has hinted at vacating his title and moving up to challenge for the lightweight title. What do you make of this?
I mean, if he really wants to move up and challenge for the title at 155 pounds, then I do believe that, vacating the title is what the right move would be. And I only say that from the standpoint of there are contenders who are waiting in the wings, or there are people who he hasn't cleared out, if you will, at 145 pounds. I don't know that that makes sense for Islam, though. I know that, uh, Islam is probably a fight down the way. I know that he's also talked about vacating then going up and fighting Charles Oliveira. I think that that's probably a more realistic fight to get right away if he were to go up, just because Islam's booked against Arman coming up in the next couple weeks in January. And, I don't know, time wise, it's kind of a tough situation there. Like, how far out are you willing to wait? What is, where does Charles fall? Does Arman, or excuse me, does Islam, if Islam beats Arman for a second time, what does he decide to do? Does he decide to maybe then go up to 170 and challenge? Where is his next challenger? Because Islam has came out and said he has no interest in fighting Topuria. If we're looking at this on both sides of the equation, Islam said, what do I gain from that? If I fight him and I beat him, they're going to say all the same things that they said when I beat Volkanovski. I beat smaller guy. I beat guy from lower weight class. What do I gain from this, brother? What do I gain? So I can understand that Ilya wants the challenge, or he wants the glory of two belts. I understand why Islam would balk at that challenge.
Comedian Theo Vaughn went viral for being shown on the broadcast sitting solo in his cage side seat during the early prelims. Are you surprised?
I'm not surprised. The Rat King, aka Theo Vaughn, he is a real one, Danny. He's been a big MMA fan that's been a presence at a lot of UFC shows over the last couple of years. Close personal friend and connections with Dustin Poirier, both from Louisiana. But also, I can say it from the direct level or this side of things. Theo Vaughn came to one of our local level amateur shows in Colorado a couple of years ago, back in 2022. It was an afternoon AMI MMA show that we had at the Stampede. This was the night after he had a show here in Denver. I'm pretty sure he was with guys like Corey Sandhagen and those guys, but he comes and watches the show in the crowd at the Stampede. I turn around from the broadcast table and look up, and there's the Rat King himself with his mullet and his backwards hat. Like, it was it was cool to see. That's by far the biggest high profile celebrity that's ever been to one of our shows. But that just goes to show you, though, if Theo wasn't a true fan of mixed martial arts, regardless of his friends, connections, or whatever, he's not going and spending an entire afternoon going and watching amateur MMA. So that goes to speak to you to the level of love and appreciation that he actually really does have for it. So gotta love guys like Theo Vaughn out there who bring just such an electric energy to whatever room that he's in. And yeah, that's great to see when you have the mainstream presence of some of those stars who are across so many different platforms and mediums who help grow the sport just by them being there. But just like that, folks, we are all out of time. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in for this original combat sports programming each and every week. We got those couple of events going on over the weekend. We had the Airtight Boxing Show here in Denver. We also have the Battle MMA Championships MMA event going down at the Norris Penrose Event Center in Colorado Springs. Come and check one of those out if you're in town. If not, you have the UFC going down this weekend. Local man in the Hanyak, Dustin Jacoby, going to be competing on that card. Again, want to say thank you to all of you for tuning in and rocking with us each and every week. We'll be back with you next week, same time, same place. Thank you to my man, Danny Bailey, behind the boards, holding it down for me every week. I'm Jordan Kurtz. Give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. This is the MMA Plug on Mile High Sports.